America blinked first. 10 days. That's how long it took for the world's most powerful military to quietly ask for a ceasefire in a war it had started. The message was sent to Iran, but the response was not a quiet acceptance. Instead, Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, appeared on American national television. Calm, defiant. He looked directly into the camera and stated, "And now you want to ask for a ceasefire again? This doesn't work like this." A public, absolute rejection. This inverts the entire logic of power. What is the actual strategic reality here? Why would a nation under attack refuse a superpower's plea to stop the fighting? To understand how this moment of public humiliation was possible, we have to go back. Back to the very beginning of a war America believed it had already won. We have to look at the flawed plan they called Operation Epic Fury. The name itself signaled the intent. Operation Epic Fury. Even the branding promised overwhelming force, wrapped in a swift, controlled conclusion. Inside the planning rooms, Iran was reduced to a flowchart of nodes and pressure points. Briefers walked senior officials through timelines measured in days, not months, speaking in the language of decisive blows and clean exits. In public, the White House framed the campaign as a necessary focused action to neutralize Iran's nuclear trajectory and degrade the regime's ability to threaten the region, while stressing that this was not the beginning of another open-ended war. The same plan that was sold to voters as reluctant and limited was, behind closed doors, pitched as a chance to prove that American power, fully synchronized, could reorder a hostile regime with surgical precision. Launched on February 28, 2026, the operation was massive. In the opening hours, a US-led coalition executed coordinated strike waves on over 1,700 strategic targets across Iran, command and control centers, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps headquarters, known missile sites. Each appeared as a blinking icon on Situation Room screens, checked off in rapid sequence as engaged and then destroyed. Airspace over the Gulf and into Iran was thick with overlapping flight corridors and strike paths, managed through command centers lit by live feeds of impacts on key nodes. This was not designed as a grinding contest of attrition. It was a decapitation strike, built to hit fast, then stand back and watch the internal collapse. The explicit goal, spelled out in White House statements, was twofold. Physically eliminate Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, and so thoroughly disrupt the regime's security apparatus that it would unravel from within. The theory was simple and dangerously seductive. Cut the head off the snake, and the body will cease to function. To planners, this promised maximum effect with limited exposure. Remove a single figure, shatter elite cohesion, and the rest of the structure would fragment under its own weight. This is why the model appealed. It assumed loyalty flowed only from fear of one man, that security services would splinter without his directives, and that a population exhausted by sanctions and repression would not rally to defend the state. In other words, Iran was treated as a mechanical diagram of power centers, not as a society with memory and scars. For a moment, reality seemed to validate the model. In the first hours of the conflict, the plan appeared to be a stunning success. The initial strike found its mark. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was dead. In the Pentagon, it must have felt like checkmate. The hardest objective achieved on day one, the decisive piece removed. The dominoes were supposed to fall in sequence. But what the planners failed to account for was not the structure of the Iranian regime. It was the memory of the Iranian people. That memory did not translate into political collapse. It translated, almost immediately, into a wave of steel, Iran's response was not a symbolic face-saving gesture. It was a coordinated, multi-front offensive, calibrated to flood US and Israeli defenses, and to show that American assets could be hit in depth. For Tehran, this was survival math, a blunt message that any future strike on Iranian soil would carry a non-negotiable cost. Over 500 ballistic missiles and more than 2,000 drones were launched simultaneously. The targets weren't just inside Israel. Alert screens lit up at American bases in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, and Bahrain. This did not resemble sterile simulations. It was a brute force saturation attack aimed at America's sophisticated but finite defense systems. Each battery had finite interceptors ready to fire, and the incoming tracks were built to exceed that. For a soldier at one of those bases, the shift was immediate. Sirens did not cycle off. Radios filled with call signs, impact reports, and orders to take cover. Overhead, white interceptor trails climbed toward invisible points on the horizon, crossing in a rough lattice against the dark. For every missile launched, several new threat indicators appeared on the bunker screens. It felt like standing on the wrong side of a brutal equation. Too many inbound weapons, not enough shots. The Thaid and Patriot systems that underpinned the shield were being swamped as operators watched engagement grids fill with more inbound symbols than interceptors queued to fire. Then one of the network's critical eyes, the AN/TPY-2 THAAD radar in Jordan, dropped out, confirmed destroyed, and a sector of the map went dark. Warning tones stacked faster than crews could clear them as senior officers chose which bases to leave uncovered. Patriot batteries across the region began reporting critical missile shortages. The architecture meant to deliver a quick, contained victory had become a grinding contest of inventory, and the United States was running out of ammunition. From that point, it was no clean air campaign, but a grinding fight measured in wrecked infrastructure and American dead. At least 7 US service members were killed in the initial barrages, their loss made visible in flag-draped coffins flown home. Set against the earlier narrative of a controlled operation, those coffins were the verdict on the strategic bet that had been made. With the military option now visibly degraded, Washington was facing a new and far more desperate problem. That new problem wasn't on a battlefield in the Middle East. It was inside the White House Situation Room. In that room, confidence had drained out. The big screens no longer showed mission timelines. They showed polling dashboards. NPR Marist, 56% opposed to the strikes. CNN, 59% disapproved. The numbers climbed in red bars, while senior staff watched, aides scrolling in near silence. On another feed, the casualty brief scrolled past. Reports of Americans killed and wounded inching upward instead of tapering off, moving in lockstep with disapproval at home. If those polls were the first blow, the second came at the pump. Within a week, crude had punched through $100 a barrel, and US gasoline prices were up 43 cents a gallon. For transport-heavy businesses, investors, and households, that spike meant thinner margins, higher input costs, and markets repricing both energy and consumer risk. The war stopped being a distant broadcast and became a direct tax on every consumer, every business, every commute. And with that, tolerance for more strikes began to collapse. This is the pivot. Bad polling, rising body bags, and an energy shock fuse into a domestic crisis, and inside the West Wing, the objective shifts to damage control. Escalate and risk a wider regional war for diminishing returns. Hold steady and let casualties, prices, and disapproval all grind higher. Pull back publicly and admit failure. Around that table, the conversation moved, almost reluctantly, from "how do we win" to "what actually stops the bleeding?" With military options exhausted, every new strike carrying higher escalation risk and lower returns, polls, prices, and body bags had stripped away the White House's leverage. A stark reversal was the only move left. The aggressor, now losing the initiative, was forced to quietly reach out. For an administration that had just projected steely resolve at the podium, abandoning public toughness for private back channels was a clear climb down Tehran would read instantly. Through non-public back-channel communications, the United States sent messages to Tehran. The message wasn't a demand, it was a plea for a ceasefire, a pause in the fighting. In that moment, the strategic initiative was no longer in Washington's hands. It had been completely handed to Iran. And so, with the strategic initiative now in Tehran, attention shifted from back-channel talks to a live interview on NBC News. Under the studio lights, the anchor softened his tone and read out to Washington's ceasefire offer as a reasonable humanitarian compromise, asking whether Iran would stop the bloodshed and give diplomacy a chance. The expectation was obvious. A cautious, non-committal answer that preserved Washington's dignity. Instead, that supposedly safe question was put to Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, in front of millions. Araghchi did not take the off-ramp. He looked straight into the camera, and when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost conversational, but it refused the usual diplomatic script. "We negotiated twice," he said, letting a silence hang in the studio. "And then, in the middle of negotiations, they attacked us." It was not theatre, it was a cold, precise timeline. He was pointing to two specific episodes, burned into Tehran's memory. The talks in June 2025, and again on 28th of February 2026, the very day Operation Epic Fury was launched against his country. The anchor blinked, glanced down at his notes, and for a moment, said nothing. After laying out that pattern, he spelled out the conclusion. This is a war of choice by the United States. This is a trap. From Tehran's perspective, a temporary ceasefire after being hit twice during negotiations no longer looked like goodwill. It looked like the first move in the same ambush, recasting Washington's humanitarian pause as tactical deception. For viewers who had watched the United States launch Operation Epic Fury and fail to secure a quick victory, the signal was clear. The side that started the war was now asking for a pause and being refused. Iran's position was that it would not pause the conflict only to invite another strike. It would only consider a permanent structural end to the war. For Washington, accepting that on Iranian terms would mean acknowledging that Operation Epic Fury had failed and locking in an outcome defined by Tehran, a condition it could not politically accept without admitting unconditional defeat. It distilled the core logic of power, brutal in its simplicity. A country that is losing does not reject a ceasefire on national television. A country that is losing begs for one. Washington, having launched the war and then moved to request a pause, had just signaled that it needed breathing room, while Tehran had enough leverage to refuse that request in front of a global audience and insist on setting the terms. Iran itself cites those two recent betrayals during negotiations as its justification. Given that record and the visible shift in leverage, analysts will still split. Is this a rational response born from hard-won experience, or a dangerously rigid stance that risks a longer, mere devastating war if Washington digs in rather than concedes? Share your analysis in the comments. This kind of public rejection of a truce from a position of strength is not a radical new invention.
It is a classic strategic maneuver, drawn from a playbook written by Winston Churchill during Britain's darkest hour in 1940. Understanding what happened then reveals everything about where this conflict is headed next. The year is 1940. May, France has collapsed. British troops scrape off the beaches of Dunkirk, leaving their tanks and guns in the sand. Across the Channel, with most of Europe's capitals under his flag, Hitler offers peace, saying he has no need to invade if Britain will simply accept the new map of the continent. In the War Cabinet, that offer is debated around a scarred table. When Foreign Secretary Lord Halifax speaks, the room falls quiet. Britain is alone, he says, its army exhausted and half disarmed after Dunkirk. If the war continues, the next phase will be fought in British ports and towns, with losses the Empire cannot repair. On paper, it adds up. Rejecting that logic means owning every bomb that may fall and risking Britain's end as a great power. To many in that room, anything else looks like national suicide, so he urges negotiation. But Churchill is reading a different ledger. He remembers Munich in 1938, signatures on paper, peace in our time, and then within months, the agreement discarded and new territory taken. Munich set a pattern: pause, rearm, strike again. For a regime that moved that fast after Munich, a truce in 1940 is not peace. It is breathing space before the next, heavier blow. To talk terms now, he argues, is to meet Germany not as an equal, but on its knees. Any deal would leave Britain weakened and exposed when, not if, the war resumed. Some ministers stare at notes, others avoid his eye. The room is not with him. When he finally rejects Hitler's overture, the room drops into silence. Halifax's jaw tightens, but the decision stands. Britain will gamble everything rather than trust a paper promise. That choice is carried to the country in words that outlived the war itself. We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender. This is the Churchill precedent. Turning down a ceasefire from weakness against an enemy with a record of broken promises is not madness. It is a calculated bet that survival lies in refusing an illusory safety. And this is the parallel now. When Iran refuses a US ceasefire request after pressure and unkept assurances, it is using that same logic. What this signals is a conclusion. Pausing on the aggressor's terms is more dangerous than fighting on. But rejecting that illusory safety isn't just a philosophy learned from history. It's built into how the Iranian state is wired. Their refusal sits in the way. Power and trigger authority are divided. To see it, you have to look at the country's bifurcated command structure. On one side sits the civilian diplomatic leadership, the president, the foreign ministry. On the other sits the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps with its own chain of command, whose commanders retain autonomous authority to keep fighting regardless of what is said behind podiums. This is not a rogue military freelancing policy. The IRGC's regional command is deliberately decoupled from civilian diplomacy, so a presidential gesture never automatically reaches the rocket batteries. That firewall between words and weapons serves one critical strategic purpose. It prevents diplomatic signals from being misread by an enemy as evidence of military weakness. Every apology has to be treated as talk layered on top of unchanged firepower. The result is a built-in escalation loop. To watch that machine operate, look at March 2026, when President Masoud Pezeshkian stepped up and issued a public apology to his Gulf neighbors. He ordered a halt to all strikes. On the surface, it looked like a pivot toward calm,
the sort of line that dominates headlines. But as those words were circulating, IRGC commanders followed a different logic. Missile crews stayed on duty, drones kept lifting off, and the pattern of attacks across the region barely bent. The public face said, "Stop." The machinery underneath never heard the order. What this actually signals is that any temporary ceasefire agreement is fundamentally unreliable. The president can agree to peace, but the machine of war might not stop. This is why their stance is so absolute. From their perspective, the only way to silence the war machine is with a permanent peace that rewires who can pull the trigger. Until that happens, you don't get de-escalation. You get cycles. A ceasefire is announced. Hope and risk premia compress, and then the shooting resumes because the machinery never stood down. Each failed lull hardens attitudes, confuses policymakers, and blindsides anyone who priced in calm. And understanding this unbreakable machine is crucial if you want to read the geopolitics. But on its own, that knowledge does nothing for you unless you tie it back to the only thing that actually matters, the safety of your own capital. And that connection is now being priced in by global markets as the bill for years of strategic hubris comes due. Iran's refusal doesn't read as another containable flare-up. It reads as a long-duration conflict risk. Instead of assuming the fire will be stamped out quickly, investors now face a geopolitical risk premium, a persistent surcharge on capital embedded in prices until the long war scenario is disproved. Stop. Do not let your eyes glaze over at the term risk premium. That isn't Wall Street jargon. It is code for a hidden tax on your capital. This is the second and third order effect they never price into their limited operation plans. It's why your costs are spiking and you watch for the next leg down. We need to turn that abstract label into the actual price you'll pay at the pump, in the grocery store, and in your portfolio. Higher energy costs are the transmission belt. Brent crude is already above 85 a barrel. The Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of global oil flows, is now a live choke point. In a recent note on this conflict, Goldman Sachs estimates that about $14 per barrel is now pure geopolitical risk premium, and warns that a sustained conflict could push prices toward $120 and shave roughly 1 percentage point off global growth. That shift supports energy producers while squeezing transport and manufacturing margins, and hitting consumer-facing and global growth-sensitive equities. As fuel and freight costs bleed into prices, consumers pull back, revenue growth slows, and the market compresses the multiple it is willing to pay for those earnings. Credit spreads widen for weaker borrowers. Mohammed El-Erian has been blunt about where this points. A rising risk of stagflation that erodes your real returns while growth disappoints and equity multiples fail to expand. Capital is adjusting. Money is rotating out of high beta equities, emerging market risk and lower quality credit, and into gold, the US dollar, and commodity ETFs, while cash-like safe havens are rebuilt. This is more than a one-day risk-off wobble. It is the early phase of a structural reallocation toward real assets and hedges, driven by a persistent geopolitical risk premium, anchored in a credible long war scenario. For the experienced investor, this is the real signal. The playbook shifts from betting on a quick resolution to hedging a long war. That means less reliance on pure growth, more weight in real assets, and deliberate use of inflation hedges, duration, and volatility protection. The market's verdict is in. A durable risk premium, a hidden tax on growth, earnings, and your capital. And that verdict leads directly to the final conclusion.
about where this path ends. So where does this path truly end? In a long, costly war. Washington is pushing for a ceasefire as a reset. A pause to ease domestic pressure and regroup without admitting failure. Tehran, shaped by a record of broken promises, hears pause as a trap and demands a permanent end to strikes, not another lull that snaps back into escalation. Those positions leave neither side room to climb down, so planners assume a war that grinds on. Markets do the same. Instead of a quick de-escalation, capital now prices a conflict that lingers for years. Higher risk premia, stickier energy, heavier defense spending, and more volatility for portfolios tied to trade. History has a word for wars where both sides believe the other will give in first. It is not a short word, and it is not a cheap one. In Tehran, people watch black rain fall, heavy drops that streak windshields and leave a greasy dust on the pavement. It isn't weather. It's water laced with soot from burning oil depots, turning each breath into a calculation of risk. This is what it looks like when American hubris about managing a limited war collides with an Iranian resolve forged by betrayal, locking both into attrition, paid in damaged lungs, higher bills, years of strategic drift. If this causal analysis provided you with a clearer framework than the mainstream noise, subscribe to this channel for more insights that reveal the real signals shaping our world and your wealth.